I explained it and I said, it means that you're stressed or worried. And he said, really? Because in the American meaning, it means you're sexually aroused. So I've been wondering in the last 20 years how many people I've been going around saying, oh, I'm feeling a bit hot and bothered today, you know. And there are lots of things that you'll probably recognize, like grammar differences, okay? I'm going to run through these really, really quickly. Modal verbs. We tend to use some modal verbs that you probably don't use. They probably sound rather old-fashioned in American. We have group nouns. Now, with this one, it's quite all right for me in British English to say Microsoft are trying to buy TikTok. And when I do that with Jay, he goes, oh, your grammar's incorrect.
Yeah.
So if you have a student who does this, be aware that in British English, it's quite all right. Okay. Zipping on. There are a few other grammar things, but grammar isn't that important. It's very similar. I'm not going to go into everything here. Here's a very common one. We use the verb have with got, like this. Have you got any money? Yes, I have in British English. Whereas you'd make it regular. And you just use the verb do. Punctuation. I don't know what it is, but you seem to use an awful lot of punctuation.
Yeah.
You sort of add dots and you add capitals left, right, and centre. So if I'm designing a screen for Americans, I have to put in more capital letters.
We're pretentious. You have the language first, so you don't have to be pretentious.
Oh, now we need to talk about that, because I think there's an inferiority complex that can go on among Americans that's quite unjustified. But when you write at a time, you write capital AM, capital PM, and things like that. And of course, the really tricky thing with dates is you write them the other way around. And I think that this is something that it's not a great thing to do in American English, because it's very confusing.
Well, sure. And also because most of the world doesn't do it that way. So it's not just a British thing. It's more of an American thing. So
I wish that weren't the way. I had a friend once who was teaching an administrative assistant in Germany, and she sent her boss over for a meeting in America, all the way on the plane, hotel and everything, in the wrong month.
Yeah, I'm surprised that doesn't happen more often, or maybe it does. Yeah.
And then of course you have your spelling, and your spelling is much more regular than ours. So I rather wish we had your spelling. If you want to learn spelling, it's quite easy. You just change your spell checker over and you'll learn the different spellings in no time.
That's right.
Then you get very confused and you just start writing anything. That's what I do anyway. So I need that spell checker on. And then pronunciation I find interesting, but I'm not going to go much into that either. But there are lots of like your sounds that we do. And we have an extra vowel. We have an o vowel, that lot vowel. And the R sound, of course. Sometimes Jay still doesn't understand me when I say a word, because I was saying cause and effect the other day, and he said, what? And it turned out he was trying to put an R in there for me to sort of compensate. And he thought I was talking about cause beer or something. It's sort of, because we just don't use those R's in places where you would. Vocabulary. These are ones that I've just come across with that have slightly different meanings in just the last few months. I'm always learning these new words and phrases and slight differences between British and American. But the one that's really still has me thinking sometimes is the word quite. It's the trickiest word for Brits and Americans to use. And let's just go on. There are ways where we can use the words with the same meaning. So if I say, I'm quite happy to wait, I've had quite enough coffee today, I'm not quite ready, all these would mean the same in British and American English. But it gets tricky, and the meaning there is 100% completely. But there's another meaning that we have in British English, which is only fairly.
Yes.
So it's a sort of rather, it's not completely at all. And so if your boss says to you, your report is quite good, that's a big difference. What will also happen is, in situations like, I'm quite happy with your report, if I stress quite in British English, it means really not very, very happy at all. I'm quite happy with your report.
Yeah.
But if Jay does it in American English, I'm quite happy with your report, it means he's really happy. So that stress change and intonation can really sort of power up the difference.
Yeah, I wonder what you're saying, like, I'm quite happy with your report, like kind of cautiously, right? I'm quite happy with it. It's almost like I'm not so enthusiastic about it. It's almost like the stress is on the negative.
That's right, exactly. In British English. So watch that quite. It's you really have to do a double think on that. All right. But I also want to share with you some of the things that have been the biggest learning curve for me in the United States.
Okay,
and they're not to do with grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation. I mean, these things are all really important, but nowhere near as the sort of area where you can really get things wrong as the one I want to share with you.
So you mean like culturally?
I'm going into culture now, but it's to do with discourse.
So more pragmatic.
Because it's how I have to structure my thoughts differently to be understood in British and American. Because there are differences in the discourse.
Top-down knowledge. We were talking about this recently with listening skills, how important it is to have that top-down knowledge based on experience, and how so much of that is cultural.
I'll start with an example. This is a little story, right? My British publisher came over to the US, and he was at dinner at our home, and he was meeting Jay for the first time. So they were getting to know one another. And he said to Jay, "Oh yes, baseball." He said, "Tell me, what are the rules for baseball?" And I heard Jay say, "Oh, it's really very simple."
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, because there was no way Jay was going to simplify this. He had an opportunity to talk about baseball, and he would go on about it for hours, right? So he goes into great detail and explains all these rules to Barnaby. But he also says, "But Barnaby, what about that game you have in the UK that's similar to baseball, cricket? What are the rules for cricket?" All right. So I heard Barnaby say, "It's rather complicated, I'm afraid." And then he took advantage of the situation and went into great length and detail about the rules of cricket. All right. So they both wanted to go into detail. But let's just have a look. I'll just show you. Let's just have a look at what they were saying there.
I think I know what you're getting at. It's very, very interesting.
Whoops, hang on. Oh, I'm in the wrong view.
Take your time. We'll chop it all up afterwards.
Here we go. All right. So we're going to whiz on from that one, and we're going to look at this one. There it is. So let's just have a look at what they said there, because they were both introductions to the same thing, but the Brit felt he had to apologize because he knew he could be imposing on Jay with a long explanation. Jay, on the other hand, felt that he had to be inclusive and friendly, and he wanted to reassure him and be not put him off. And so what you've got going on there is this different emphasis that we get between the way we have to structure things, with the American emphasizing solidarity, inclusion, let's be friendly, let's get close, and the Brit worried about imposing, of getting in your way and not letting you go about your business. And
right on target.
what I want to show you here is that American English puts much more emphasis on things like showing appreciation, affiliation, inclusion, and British, we tend to go for not imposing on people, letting them go about their business and not get in their way. And if you think about it, both of them are aspects of politeness, important ones. And we have technical words for these. American English is referred to as positive politeness, and the more British style would be referred to as negative politeness. If you think about it, the stereotype of that garrulous American who tells you their whole life history in the first 3 minutes that you've met them, right? Yes. That's based on this.
Yes.
Where and then the stereotype of the standoffish Brit, who's very sort of reserved and doesn't talk to anyone in a railway carriage. You've got the two stereotypes there that are kind of illustrations.
Yes, yes.
Now, I need to go back to those terms, positive and negative, because it's not that one is good and one is bad. They're just the technical words. This theory actually is, there's been a lot of work in sociolinguistics on politeness theory, and it dates right back to, what's his name? The positive face, Goffman. And his work on face issues and positive and negative face. So we wound up with these difficult terms of positive and negative politeness. And of course, it's not that one is completely positive and one is completely negative. It's just that they're different weightings. We tend to sort of weight these things a little differently in the two varieties of the language.
Yeah, and knowing about this also leads to so many other like aha moments about culture. It's like once you figure something like that out, a lot of other things start to make, oh, well, then he or she is doing it that way, not because they're impolite or they're aggressive.
It's because there are these two different ways of showing politeness to someone. Sometimes people want to be included and loved and warm, feel warmth from you. And other times they just want to go about their business and do what they want to do without you interrupting. And so they're both ways of being polite. And that's where the waiting comes in, you know. And it isn't just a British and American issue, because they're good illustrations, but it's a difference that arises in lots of cultures. So it's very useful to know when you're working with students from another culture who perhaps do some of these things a little difficultly.
That's right.
And you're right, it leads to all sorts of things in different aspects and situations in life. And a good example for me is compliments. Like compliments took me a long time to master compliments in America. They were one of my biggest challenges. It's tricky, because if I do someone a small favor, then they might say, "Oh, you're totally awesome," and I feel obliged to say, "Oh no, don't worry, it was no trouble."
Right.
And then they're thinking, "That's peculiar. Of course, it was no trouble. I was just." It's also another thing that's quite different is compliments are used very often to start a conversation here, just as an invitation to talk. So where we might just say, if we say anything, we might say, "A nice day today, isn't it?"
Yeah.
You know, here it might be, "I love your accent," or "I love your eyes."
Oh my God, where did you get that sweater?
Yes.
So amazing.
Yes. And I have to explain to my students, you know, sometimes, no, don't worry, they're not American. It's not all fake. this is actually it's a ritual, and it's just how you invite someone to talk to you.
Can I interrupt with a little story here? Because I have a feeling this is what you're talking about. Students, when I was teaching in New York for many years, I had students from all over the world. A very common question I got was, or actually complaint was, God, Americans are so insincere. They're fake, Well, what happened? Oh, well, this American was talking to me and asking me, seemed like so, excited to meet me and talk to me, and then said, we should get coffee sometime. And then I gave my numbers. I'll call you, and they never called. I want to hear your take. Does that connect with what you're talking about, or is it something else? What I used to tell my students that really made them, they couldn't believe it, was that I said my best friend, this is true, my best friend often will say in a text or on the phone, okay, cool, I got to go, man. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll call you like in the afternoon, okay? Like around like in the afternoon, all right? All right, talk to you then. And he never would call at that time. And I knew he wouldn't. And I never, ever questioned his friendship. So that's what I mean. You say they're not always fake. He wasn't fake. It was ritualistic. That was just his way of saying goodbye. It was part of the function of, farewell.
Farewell is really quite interesting because Brits have a lot of problems getting out of a place. Your friend had developed a little tactic there.
Yeah.
When you separate from someone, if it's someone you know really well, like it's a member of your family, you can probably just say goodbye. And if it's the bank and you're never going to talk to this person again, you can just say goodbye. But for the people in the middle, there's a sort of bulge there where you need to do something to suggest that the relationship can continue in the future. And we have different ways of accomplishing it. Brits find it terribly hard. I think Americans are really good at it, actually, because they have all these lovely phrases that their mothers taught them, like, take care of yourself, gotta go, and all these sorts of things that get them out the door fairly quickly. Whereas Brits will say, oh, I really must be going. And then they'll sit there for another half hour, and then they'll say, oh, is that the time? Oh, I've really got to go soon. Oh, no, have another cup of tea.
Is that imposing what you were saying about negative politeness, or is this something different, you think?
It's connected with all this. But the point about something you said just now that's really important that I want to emphasize is, I think it's a real mistake to imagine it's fake. And students can get that impression, and they really need to be told that it isn't. And sometimes, I'll point out that their language is full of rituals too. When somebody asks me, where are you going, which, translation say from Tagalog, they don't really want to, if I told them where I was going, they would think I was very odd. It just means hello, how are you, sort of thing, or have you eaten yet is another good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like in Taiwan, they'll say, as a greeting, have you eaten? But they really don't care whether they're not going to feed you if you haven't.
Sure.
It's just, and we have all these sort of rituals and things that are built in that they could be unconscious of in their culture as well.
Yeah.
So, keep getting them to keep an open mind, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Well, it's such a great way to learn about people and a culture, and while you're learning the language, is to learn these rituals.
Yes, and it can be a challenge for them. I mean, I'll tell you, I have a problem with, I've mentioned compliments, right? And there's a situation I find hard is, I'd give a talk somewhere and Americans might come up at the end and they'd say, wow, Vicki, I really loved your presentation. Now, being a Brit, it's quite difficult because of this positive, negative politeness thing, it's harder for us to accept compliments. So I would have to say something like, oh, I'm glad you liked it. I made a few mistakes. But that would compel the American to say, no, I never noticed that. It was really good. And then I'd have to, and because they'd got more excited, I'd have to say something like, Oh, I hope I didn't go on too long. I was worried about this bit. And then they'd feel compelled to come back. And I've been in conversations like this which go horribly wrong in the States because I don't know how to accept a compliment.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's wound up with us both wanting to crawl under a table and go and hide because it's been so seriously off. And students who come from negative politeness cultures will have problems with this too. And so, you know, if I've got my Chinese or Korean or whatever students, they often so what's going on here? So here's the advice I give them. I say, if an American pays you a compliment, don't hesitate. Get in quick and say thank you. And for goodness sake, don't show any signs of disagreement because it will really screw things up. If they say, you're looking good, thank them and say, you think they're looking good too. And perhaps add that you really like their hairstyle, their hat, their dental work, whatever seems appropriate. Yeah. And it just signals you're happy for the conversation to continue.
What I hear a lot, but this sounds a little bit like the negative politeness, but Americans often say, you really think so? But then they won't keep going about it. They'll be like, you really think so? Oh, well, you know, and then they're really...
That's right. They'll just query it and jump ahead. Yes, that's right. It's not that Brits are more modest than Americans, or Americans are more modest than Brits. There's none of that going on. It's just that there's a heavy weighting in the US on showing agreement. You don't want to disagree with the person who just complimented you because it could imply you think their judgment is stupid, right? Whereas in the UK, there's heavy weighting on modesty. In the UK, appearing to be modest is what it's about. And then there are other cultures, of course, where it doesn't happen. And I just want to show you, this is a little phrase that comes from some research into Chinese compliments. And an appropriate response in Chinese would be, wow, Zhang, you're looking great. No, I'm very old and wrinkled. I mean, well, you can imagine, you can see why our students would have problems with compliments. Yeah. You know, that's what they've gone up with. And there are some other, you know, questions that have come up that I find quite interesting in all this area, which are to do with false misconceptions in a way, which is directness. Are Americans really more direct? People say they are. And politeness. Are Brits really more polite? People say they are. And it's my contention that neither of these is true. I mean, I just meet the same levels of directness and politeness on both sides of the pond, you know. And there are lots of ways in which Americans are indirect like Brits. So I'll just show you some examples that I found that I think are fun.
Great.
So, you know, these are questions that sort of fascinate me all the time. So here's some examples. I've drawn them from Stephen Pinker. There's also one I sneaked in at the end from Michael Swan. All right. So if you say, were you raised in a barn? Of course, it means shut the door. Would you like to come up and see my etchings? Doesn't really mean, yes. Would you like to, right? Okay.
That's Netflix and chill, right?
Yes. Nice store you've got here. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. All right. And then there's this one. This is the Michael Swan one. Let's not have a repetition of last time. So you've got all these ways that we talk of, you know, we have referring to things that go on both sides of the pond. What I want to point out about this indirectness is it has benefits. It's socially less awkward sometimes if we're indirect, because if you said to someone, would you like me to seduce you? It would be very threatening. But would you like to see my etchings is less of a problem, right? And, you know, let's not have a repetition of last time means that there's going to be less embarrassment because you haven't had to mention Melissa. So masking our intentions like this with hints and innuendos and these things can fulfill a social function. And it goes on in all languages. But I think it's a sort of interesting dilemma for us as teachers, because in some ways we want to teach our students to be direct, because if they're more direct, then their meanings can be crystal clear. Actually, human beings aren't direct.
Yes.
So we need to be aware of these things.
If you're a second language speaker, or in a different, with people either in a different culture or with people from a different culture somewhere, you're also going to feel lost or embarrassed or just can't figure out what's going on. And it's not just about studying this idiom or that idiom. Pragmatics is more, really understanding in a situation, indirect communication.
Yes.
For meaning, and on tests, Cambridge tests, and like the TOEFL and the TOEIC, and they're always asking, what can you infer from this? What is the person implying? And they often have things like, not directly saying, I want to use this or borrow this, or could you close the window? But like the examples you gave, because you need to know this for business communication.
That's right. Most of us want to build good relationships with the person we're talking to, and it's all relationship building stuff. Yeah. And so probably one of the key messages that is worth pointing out to your students is people don't like saying no. Linguists refer to no as a dispreferred response. And it sort of goes deep into the human psyche that we prefer to say yes if we could. So if I say those biscuits look nice, and it gives you the opportunity to say, yes, I bought them for my children's school. And then I can say, oh, how old are your children now? And we can both pretend I wasn't asking, so the problem's solved. And so I see lots of indirectness going on around me in America, and lots of situations, I think, where Americans might imagine that they're less polite than Brits, but it's not right or wrong or more polite or not polite. It's just sort of different sides of that coin again, that weighting that goes on between different ways of showing politeness. I think some of it might come from our use of modals, because we tend to use modals, as I mentioned earlier, a little more and differently in the UK. I know that I tend to say, could you more? So if I get in a cab, I could ask the driver, could you take us to Independence Hall, please? And my American friends might say, well, of course you could, Vicki, otherwise we wouldn't be getting into the cab, So Americans seem more direct than me there. But I've got another example to say. If Jay's cooked dinner, he might say to me, would you like to clean up? And I would think it's perfectly all right to respond, no, I'd like to carry on sitting here with my feet up, drinking some wine, please. It seems a perfectly logical answer to me. So there's a situation where, his request was more polite than mine would have been. There are all sorts of funny little ones like this, like, do you mind?
I was gonna say, it's funny you said that, because I was just remembering a video you have about I don't mind. Which
yes.
Is really different. Really?
Yeah. What goes on there is when there are two alternatives, like A or B. So you might say, do you want red wine or white wine? Do you want pasta or spaghetti or rice or whatever? And Jay's response would be, I don't care.
That's right.
Which would sound very apathetic to my British ear. It's like, it's neutral for him. It's not apathetic.
But isn't it the intonation too? Because if you ask me, would you like A or B? And if I said, I don't care, that would be very different than, oh, I don't care.
Yes.
So it's, the high tone that stays high is...
That's right. So intonation comes into some of these. That's a great example. And my response, of course, would have to be, I don't mind.
Which is
I don't mind would be just as neutral as your
Yeah, yeah.
As you, I think the problem for that.
That's strange for us because we don't use it that way. Yeah.
That's right. What's going on there is it's flouting the maxim of relevance, I think. You know, Grice had these maxims of relevance in pragmatics. And it's for in American English, it's just a confusing non sequitur. Unless you say which one you don't mind, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, right, and also
you know,
because it's more common. You know, is this music bothering you? Oh no, I don't mind.
Yeah.
That's you know, that's probably 70 to 80% of when we say I don't mind. I would think.
Yes, but it's not. Would you like to listen to this song, or would you like to listen to that song?
Is it bothering you? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And there's another one that I came across that I haven't found any linguistic research on, and I wish someone would do it because I think there's something here. Say we've got a tax bill to pay, and Jay might say to me, what I really need you to do is go to City Hall and pay this. So I need you to do it, all right? And I understood from that it's very important. And if he says, I really need you to me it just sounds more important. But for him, there's also, and to other Americans I've asked actually, there also sounds that like there's actually a little increase in politeness because he's signifying the need is intense, then it means it's more polite. And this seems strange for Brits, but what's going on, I think, is that if we bump up the value of what I'm going to do, it's creating a condition where there will be more for you to show appreciation of.
I agree.
Do you get it?
I agree.
So he was opening the door to show more gratitude and to be more esteem, which is positive face, positive politeness, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think sarcasm is another one I want to talk about. I'm coming to the end now, Jay, but I do want to talk a little bit about sarcasm because I think they're tricky concepts in Britain and the US. And the popular wisdom amongst Brits is that Americans don't get sarcasm. And the popular wisdom amongst Americans is that it's bad. And both of these things, I think, are nonsense. All right.
Okay.
I find myself surrounded by sarcasm.
I was going to say, I mean, American, that's interesting to hear that comment. That's hard to imagine.
Yeah. And I'll talk a bit about why I think that might be later. But the first thing you have to understand is that sarcasm means different things in America and the UK. It's a bit of a false friend between the two varieties. Let me show you some examples. Are all these phrases sarcastic, do you think? These are phrases that we would describe as sarcastic, and that's in British English and American English.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you some more phrases, and I want you to tell me if they're sarcastic. I think what's going on here is in American English, sarcasm has a slightly broader meaning. It has a wider meaning. It encompasses the phrases that we saw before and these phrases too. All these phrases came from an American website called 75 Great Examples of Sarcastic Remarks.
Okay.
But in British English, we wouldn't call those phrases sarcastic. We would describe them as witty, funny, that sort of thing. Another difference between the meanings is that in British English, sarcasm may carry negative connotations or it might not. It's a more neutral term than it is in the States. When Americans are complaining about someone's remarks, I think sarcasm is more generally frowned upon in the States.
In my experience, it's more, to me, it's more needing to differentiate between being ironic and being sarcastic. So I think that some people don't really think enough about the difference there, where sarcasm is really making an ironic comment, but to hurt someone is what a lot of people would call sarcasm, and separate that from being ironic.
Okay, so that's the difference. In American English, it's about hurting someone and being unkind, and that's encompassed in its meaning. Whereas in British English, it's a much more neutral term. It might hurt them or it might not, but it's not automatically embodied in the word in the way that it is in the US.
Right, but I think that if we forget about what the word means, my guess is that it's more that there's very similar ways of using the language, whether we call it irony, sarcasm, whatever we want to call it, but that Americans might not be in tune with how people in the UK do it and vice versa. So we don't expect, it might be a situation where someone who speaks British English is being sarcastic, but we think it's very literal because we're not used to how they're saying it. We're more used to an American doing it. That's what I think. I can imagine myself I'm very, very sarcastic, ironic, whatever you want to call it, all the time, and I appreciate that humor so much. But I still might be caught off guard if somebody from the UK was doing it, because I'm also trying to figure out what they're saying, maybe their accent, different things like that. So, you really need to get it right away, sarcasm. So a British person, for example, might think, talking to me like, oh, he doesn't appreciate it, or he didn't get my sarcasm. Whereas I might have had it been someone, I'm more familiar with.
That's a perfect introduction to the point that I wanted to make next.
Oh, good. Happy to help.
All right. Something that's interesting that I've noticed, as I said, I hear sarcasm all around me in the US.
Yeah.
But something I've noticed that's a little different here is that Americans will have a tendency to say, just kidding. So they'll insult you, and it was obvious that it was meant in jest, but then they'll say, just kidding, or they'll add a nudge and a wink, right?
Yeah.
Now, even people who I'm really close with, who must know that I didn't misinterpret them, will do this sometimes. And I think what's going on here is the face issue thing again. And let me show you why. There are some risks going on when you employ sarcasm. If you explain the joke, if you don't explain the joke, then you risk that the other person could be insulted if they don't realize what's going on, right? If you do explain the joke, then you risk insulting the intelligence of the other person.
Exactly.
By implying they might not have got it. So there's a little bit of risk going on with sarcasm. And what's the lesser of the two alternatives? All right. What's the evil? What's the lesser of the two evils? Okay, well, I'll go back again. And in British, if you've got a positive face culture like America, it's really important that the other person feels included.
Like the baseball.
Right. Yes. But if you've got the negative culture going on, it's really important that you don't make a judgment about that other person, because a judgment is an imposition, and a judgment that they might not have enough intelligence to recognize the joke is a problem. This is very similar to the problems we have with compliments. If I make a compliment about you in British English, it's a kind of judgment about you. And what right have I got to make that judgment about you?
Yes.
It's an imposition. And that can seem very strange to an American, because they say, well, compliments are nice things. What's bad about that?
Yes.
And I have to say, yes, but there's potential there to insult me, because you're making this judgment about me, and you have no right to do that. You've got to leave me to go about my business without interfering. So it's really quite complex, but it's to do with this thing coming up again. These judgments, making judgments, is a real problem. The other thing I want to mention is I think that there is, generally speaking, more irony around in British English. You know how we love understatement?
Yes.
that's a form of irony, you know. And there's a lovely quote. This comes from an Alan Bennett play, but it really sums up what goes on, I think, a lot of the time. Because I think in the UK, often we don't know ourselves whether we're joking or not. It's a sort of social device that we have. We say something and possibly the other person might not like it or might take offense. So we pretend we didn't say it.
You pivot. It's pivoting.
Well, Brits love to think that they have a great sense of humour. I think that sometimes they might confuse quantity with quality a bit, you know.
Okay. You're going to be more critical as someone from there, for sure.
I mean, I think there's a lot of ambiguity in British conversations.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned before, you know, this ambiguity can have social benefits. So if I say, you know, those biscuits look nice, there is potential social benefits to expressing the request that way. But I think there are also some dangers that can go on with ambiguity. Because if we haven't gone on record with saying something like, I want a biscuit, it makes it easier to retract it later. If we say something that upsets someone, we can pretend we were just joking.
Yes.
And that's what can go on sometimes with this irony thing. So you can get a lot more backbiting in the UK. And I found that those backbiting comments, you know, and where somebody would say something a bit nasty, and then if the other person got offended, they could pretend they were just joking or whatever. But I think those backbiting comments actually just disappeared, and it's been very pleasant in the US that has happened. I'm not saying ambiguity is always good or always bad. I mean, it's just,
this is all very, very helpful. You have an unusual perspective, you know, advantage to share this with us as someone from the UK who's been living for 20 years in the US. You're in a perfect position to you know, talk about this and help us with it.
Yes, I mean, because the modesty principle is strong in the UK, there is a little bit more leeway to make fun of people and put them down. And because the modesty principle, we saw that with compliments, you know. But at the same time, Jace, I mean, nobody likes nastiness and aggression anywhere in the world.
Right.
You know, so
like nobody in the world wants to say no. They're universal things.
It's a universal, you know, these things are universal.
If you imagine a scenario playing out, you know, would you like to, you know, get lunch sometime? No, I wouldn't. You know, it's impossible. You know, there might be different ways that people would respond differently, and you know, some people might think that's more fake or that's more real. But in the end, nobody wants to directly say no, and nobody wants to have their feelings hurt or hurt someone's feelings unless there's something else going on. You know?
Yes, those are some of the things that I thought I'd share, and I hope you've enjoyed them.
I'm really glad you shared all of this, and I know people watching this are going to love to ask questions and comments. So I hope when we share the video out, we can get some conversations going. I'd love to hear what people have to say about it. I can tell you that in my experience in the Innovative Teachers of English group, which is the largest and most active group on Facebook of English teachers, that seems to be, you know, top 5 you know, question or comments. People get very interested in what you're talking about, because especially these days, as there's much more world English and, you know, cultures mixing. It's not so much, you know, just learning about what British people do or what American people do. So, you know, it's what you're talking about, and then thinking, oh my goodness, how does this affect all of the English speaking world?
It affects relationships.
Yeah.
It's huge for relationships. You know, when you're building relationships, keeping an open mind and just trying to see it from the other point of view can really help develop better understanding.
Yeah, this is Simple English Video's website, and could you just briefly, before we go, Vicki, tell us what you were telling me something about a course that you may be.
That's right.
Working on.
We're revamping our website, but much more importantly, we're creating a whole new section on our website where I'm going to be writing courses again.
Okay.
And I mean, years ago, Jason, that was really what I did mostly. I taught and I wrote courses for Oxford University Press and Pearson. And they were all English courses for learners. And they were classroom courses. They were print. They were books. You know, and tapes and videos I made for Oxford as well. But I haven't written a course for a long, long time. And I've been wanting to self-publish instead. And I found it very hard to choose a platform to work on. And I kept looking at different places like I went Udemy, Teachable. I wondered about an ebook or an app, and I couldn't decide on that, and I was a bit concerned about what I wanted to write about as well. And I knew I wanted to include video, but also text and quizzes and other things too. So it was a proper course.
So you're working on this course now, and it's going to. Do you know when it's going to be ready, or not yet?
Not yet, but I hope by January for sure.
Okay, wow.
And it's and we're going to actually launch it on our website.
Wonderful. Wow. Look forward to that. Thank you, everybody who is here today. Thank you so much, Vicki, for being here. And
my pleasure.
Thanks so much to American Teachers Institute for Featured Teachers webinar for bringing Vicki here today. Have a great day wherever you are. Thanks for coming. See you later. Bye-bye.